Hi, everyone. Welcome to the September 16th meeting of SIG Auth. Thank you for joining us today. The first item on the agenda is from Andrew. Docker auth.
Hey, yeah, so some extra context on this. So in 118, myself, Walter Fender, and Nick Turner had proposed a KEP introducing an exec-based plugin for fetching credentials for container registries. The goal being to build a pluggable replacement for the cloud provider-based keyring providers that are built into the kubelet today. I think today this is the only Kubernetes cloud provider feature that doesn't have an out-of-tree replacement, which we're going to need when we cut the cloud providers from Kubernetes sometime in the future. I think in 118, we had sign-off from this SIG on the initial alpha implementation and the KEP, but the implementation slipped both in 118 and 119. So we're trying to get this in early in 120. I think so far the most contentious thing about this PR is what to name the feature. So even though the container runtime isn't Docker, the auth config API in the kubelet was copied from Docker, and almost all container registries today support a Docker-like authentication mechanism, which the kubelet is using. So for that reason, I included the term Docker in the naming of the plugin, but I know some people disagree with this. So anyways, I would really appreciate a review from SIG Auth and hopefully get this merged early in 120.
What is the diff between this and the KEP?
I think the biggest diff is the addition of extra arguments that you can define in the plugin config, and the naming. So in the KEP, we said we would name it registry credential provider or registry credential plugin. I thought that was a little too generic and not specific enough, so I renamed everything Docker Auth plugin. But aside from that, it's the same idea. It's an exec plugin where you pass the request and response via standard in and standard
out. Do you want to go and update the KEP? Has that happened yet? Or is this, I guess my first question is this the same thing that is described in the KEP with some evolution since we last looked at it?
So I haven't updated the KEP, but it's basically the same thing. I just mainly changed the naming of things, but it's the exact same design, you could say. Not much has changed.
I would recommend getting the KEP update in so that it reflects what we're actually going to do for, I guess, additional extra args and any renames that you want to do. And I guess that can happen concurrently with the review of this PR. Is package credential provider the intended location for this API group permanently?
No, I think what we want once the initial API is in is to move all of package credential provider to staging, because the expectation would be that cloud providers would build their auth plugins out of tree and then they would import the plugin framework in there. There's actually a comment thread about this somewhere in the PR, but yeah, I think we'd want to move package credential provider somewhere in staging at some point.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, I think myself and Tim reviewed the early one, and it seemed very reasonable, as long as somebody was willing to push it over the finish line. So thank you for reinvigorating that effort. I don't have immediately any comments on the naming.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we don't have to review it now or anything. Just wanted to put it on people's radar and make sure that it's in your review queue. Thanks.
Yeah, I think getting someone from SIG and someone from SIG Auth, probably scheduling a time to review it would be helpful. I know David and I have both looked at credential provider related things in the last release. The entry bits, nothing like out of tree, and there were a couple sort of strange things around how caching was being done. Like the way that credentials were being cached didn't seem to align with like credentials could be returned per image, but then were cached without respect to the image, which seems really strange. And so I think we want to make sure before we start externalizing the interface, the inputs and outputs, we want to make sure that the inputs and outputs actually make sense. So getting someone from SIG involved together would probably help resolve both of those issues. So I am happy to be on that, and then I can look at it from the auth perspective, but I don't know who knows the node CRI bits. So
yeah, that sounds good. I think I queued it up for the SIG agenda, but yeah, it might be good to just allocate some time to just do the review together.
Yep.
Okay, I'll follow up.
Yeah, ping me on Slack or wherever, and we can find free dates that work for people.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Andrew and Jordan. Multitenancy.
Yep. So I think in our last meeting we went through, I presented a demo of the multi-tenancy benchmarks tool, and we had some good discussions and feedback around that. One of the items was, I think there was a question on whether we could use the same benchmarking tool for other, I guess, validation suites or tests that we might want to perform. One of the examples was the standardized pod security profiles that Tim is working on. So we went back and thought about options there, and I think one option we're proposing is to remove some of the multi-tenancy specific scaffolding, like perhaps like the categories and things we had assumed right now, and maybe replace them with something more flexible like labels. So the question is, if we do that, and it seems like there is a fair amount of overlap in the checks we're doing for multi-tenancy with the pod security, the standardized profiles. So would that be a reasonable way to proceed and just use labels to identify which test suites we want to run? And I think there's an example here for how you would potentially be able to run the command. And of course, we can, at the right time, rename the tool to something more meaningful. But the idea would be to reuse it then for other validation checks or conformance checks as well. So let me add a link also. I'll put this in chat. There's a link to the main repo. So if folks want to take a look, see the checks we have currently implemented, if there's suggestions for more, and we can then, if the feedback and if folks think this is a good direction, we can generalize this tool and move to using labels to identify these validation or conformance suites.
Yeah, without knowing much about how it works, this sounds reasonable. I think That's do all benchmarks, would all benchmarks still live in this tree? And you would,
No, I think we could move them and, you know, yeah, potentially also we could decouple actually building the tool itself from the benchmark suites which are being executed, but the code would have to be picked up from somewhere, of course, right, to compile in.
yeah, compiling in is going to be a barrier for people adding and experimenting with benchmarks. Yeah, I think it would be nice to figure out how we could, how you could compose this without the need for changes to MTB. But in general, it sounds like a good direction. This is step one, I think.
Okay. All right. So yeah, we can, you know, we can at least prototype the changes. Then we'll add in the ability to define labels to select which tests to run. And then the other thing I can do is I'll reach out to Tim and see, you know, what the overlap is in terms of the checks and if other checks need to be added for some of the standardized pod security definitions.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim, for the update.
Sure.
Next item, Windows privileged containers. I think there was a email about this to the mailing list yesterday, maybe.
Yep, we sent out a mail also pointing to this yesterday.
Cool. This is a design of note. What would do you want to introduce it and then?
Yeah, sure. It might be easier to kind of
to
walk a little bit through the CAP as well, because they're going to point to the same proposal. Yeah, we're in the process
Would you like to present?
Oh, I can, yeah, sure. Give me 1 second. I'm just rearranging a couple of things. Cool. Okay, can people see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Cool. So hi everyone. I'm Amber. I'm here with another couple of people from our team working on privileged container support for Windows containers. Basically, we've been kind of shipping around this KEP for the privileged containers to a couple of different SIGs to get feedback. And there's a couple of changes here that were relevant to the auth community, which we thought would be great to get some feedback on as well. So from a high level, privileged containers, I'm sure many people are familiar with what on the Linux side are used for a lot of different scenarios for Kubernetes, especially for things like kubeproxy, etc. They haven't been available in Windows so far, which have required a couple of workarounds for key scenarios and networking and storage, which have worked in some cases, but otherwise have provided some challenges. So we have been working to figure out a way to get privileged container support for Windows containers. At a high level, the approach that we've taken has mainly been quite a divergence from previous implementations for different Windows container types. Most Windows containers are created via server silos, However, in this implementation, we're going to take the use of job objects instead. As a result, we have kind of the access to the host that the server silos don't make available for the other Windows containers types, which allows for a privileged container-like behavior in Windows. The other one that this KEP kind of focuses on is this idea of host network mode. This is something that also has to be enabled for privileged networking scenarios to be workable even with the job object model. So a couple of goals of this KEP is just essentially we are trying to enable privileged access to a bunch of the OS services and host resources. Non-goals is that we don't want to provide a privilege mode for certain types of Windows container scenarios, such as Hyper-V containers. We've gotten a lot of questions about, especially as different services are moving to use Hyper-V containers, or Kubernetes services are using Hyper-V containers. What exactly is going to happen with privileged containers in the Hyper-V scenario? As of now, we're not trying to pursue any sort of nesting scenario where we put a privileged container inside of a Hyper-V container that would do something privileged then on the host. They would have to run side by side if a user is trying to use a privileged container with either process isolated or with Hyper-V containers. Additionally, we are focusing support on container D. So it's a non-goal to provide the support in Docker. So the two use cases for privileged containers in Linux that are commonly required are for daemon sets and also for node plugins. We're targeting the same use cases for the Windows container model as well. There are some kind of against caveats. The host network mode that we are mentioning is only targeted for privileged containers and pods. We're not trying to expose host network mode for process isolated containers or Hyper-V containers currently. And then additionally, privileged pods can only consist of privileged containers. We can't currently mix process isolated with the job object implementation of privileged containers due to the way that the IP is shared across the pod. For privileged containers with host network mode, the container IP will be the host IP, so mixing it will result in it just would not work. So a couple of the things that are required for us to actually get this implemented, there are going to be changes required in OCI, CRI, and kubelet, in addition to some changes that were needed in container D to enable host network mode and privileged containers. This work has actually kind of already been done internally. We've gone through a couple of tests also for different Kubernetes scenarios to make sure that that component works. There is a working prototype demo that is available in this KEP, so I do recommend people check that out if you're curious as to how this works currently. Moving kind of up the stack into a lot of the open source layers, we'll have to make some changes to the OCI spec, the CRI API, and the kubelet to get this kind of pass all the way through. This is kind of a lot of the areas with the PSP changes are the ones specifically that we want to bring to this SIG to see if we can get some feedback on as well. So kind of going into the PSP specifically, we've done a rundown with the help of James, who's on the call as well right now, as to the different PSPs that we think might have some application either to the Linux scenario and how they translate to Windows privileged containers, and also further analysis of non-privileged containers in general. But for the ones listed here are the ones that we think that might have some application or relevance to privileged containers in Windows. Some of them, there's actually very few that have a high priority for us to get enabled for privileged containers in Windows currently. For the alpha scenario, of course, we do want to get the privileged field name. The next one that might be relevant is the different host network ones, which we would be targeting in beta. For now, the support is kind of only set to the host network by default when we're looking at the alpha stage. The next one that kind of comes into relevance would probably be the GMSA. And that is something that would have more involvement, so it's something that we'd be targeting for GA. And yeah, so it would be great to get some feedback or thoughts on kind of this listing here as it's relevant to our scenario. We dive into a bit of design details, which I spoke to previously about how we're using a job object instead of a standard process isolated container silo. What that means is essentially we, have access to a lot of the host resources, as mentioned before. Things like resource limits would be available since that's something that's available through job object. And some different kind of cases that we're looking at are kind of secret mounting is getting investigated. How exactly we're going to work with the container image, just because with working with a job object and the privileged containers images, we don't exactly require, a full server core image perhaps. And we're kind of looking at seeing how we can ship a different slim-based image to satisfy requirements and kind of reduce the footprint that these containers might have. But that's something that's also kind of under discussion and open to feedback as well. And we dive into further details on the CRI implementation and kubelet implementation as well. So I do recommend people checking this out for further details beyond what I've kind of mentioned here, and providing any feedback from the auth perspective. And open to any questions.
Does this add anything to either the security context or Windows security context?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think one of the proposals was to add a privilege field to the Windows security context API objects.
Okay.
So if you scroll down just a little bit, that's documented. A little bit further.
More.
There's a section
more.
on that. Yep.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, on changes to the CRI, and then as well as.
There we go.
The Windows sandbox config object as well.
So the proposal was to reuse the privileged flag that's at the security context level, and then pass that through to the Windows sandbox configuration.
Okay, but from the API, from the Kubernetes API, it will reuse the same field.
Yeah, correct.
Awesome. Yeah, I think independent of SIG Auth, this is a really big gap that we have today, and I'm excited for this. My one comment was that PSP is, if you're not aware, deprecated. I think that what we need to do is reconcile with the pod security profiles some of the additional features. I don't think that's going to be very tricky. But one thing, since you're not modifying security, the public API version of pod security context, I don't think we need changes to PSP infrastructure, and we don't have any standard PSP policies. And I think reconciling with the pod security standards, which it looks like it's linked from the doc, might be trivial.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
That was one of the open questions we had was for any of the changes that should happen, is it recommended to look at an external out of tree enforcement tool and recommend users go in that direction versus making any modifications that might be needed to PSP? And I think.
Yeah, so I wish Tim was on the call because he's been the champion of this. I don't believe we have, maybe Rita knows. Do we have any gatekeeper policies for PSP?
Yes, we do today. Yes.
And we have them for the standard profiles?
Yes. I can link it here as well.
Awesome. I would just say double check those and make sure that they are still accurate with the changes that you intend to make. But they might require no change since you aren't adding any fields to the Kubernetes API security context. And I'm sure you're working a lot with SIG as well.
Yep.
Yeah, we brought it to them yesterday and they suggested following up here for a couple of things, but still getting feedback from them as well.
And yeah, and a couple folks have added some comments to the doc raising questions, and we're going to look into incorporating all that back into this before an actual like markdown version of this KEP goes out for review.
Awesome.
So are there any next steps from SIG Auth perspective, or?
Yeah, so my take is that this feels pretty independent, given that security context in the public API is not changing. And the AI, the one AI that I can think of is make sure that the gatekeeper profiles, pod security profiles are accurate with respect to any changes that you make. But other than that, I don't have, I can't think of anything else immediately that is either concerning or needs to be done. Jordan, David, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, if the API isn't changing, then I wouldn't expect PSP to change. I think coordinating on the pod security profiles or the standard profiles is probably the best place to do this. And having proof of concept stuff for like gatekeeper or whatever is great, but we really want to make sure that that central place is sort of the point that all external policy providers can coordinate on and notice like, oh, okay, this new thing is coming. Here's how it's going to plug into our existing sort of layered recommendations. So yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and so there was a open issue that I commented on and kind of went through for existing containers, and then linked to this KEP for future. So I think the next steps there are to like open up a doc and provide the Windows guidance for the various security features that we need. So.
Okay, I think so we'll definitely take that feedback, Amber, the concern, but the rest looks like SIG Auth is okay and on board. From a KEP standpoint, do you want us to tag you as well? Right now, SIG and SIG Windows are the only ones tagged in the enhancement issue. So you want to keep an eye, or are you okay without it?
I think we're okay. I don't think the until the security context changes, I think we can be just observe. Don't need to be explicitly called out.
Cool, awesome. So I think with that, we can probably go back to SIG and present your feedback and then see what else is needed. Thank you.
Cool, thanks guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. So we have made it through the agenda. The rest of the items are the standing items. CI Flakes and test grid. Jordan, do you want to give an update on the status of the 120 branch?
Yeah, so all of the sort of phased approach to getting approved pull requests in, all of the ones that we were tracking have been moved in. So at this point, SIGs are free to review and tag and milestone their features and fixes. And so 120 development is basically open to SIGs to manage their components now. So that's great. The unit test flake becoming stricter on unit test flakes, that has merged, and that has revealed some flaky unit tests. I'm not aware of any that belong to SIG Auth, so yay us. Yeah, so that is most of the updates that I have. I think I called out last time a gap around upgrade tests, and that was specifically impacting SIG Auth because we want to make progress on the types of service account tokens we inject into containers, and we need to have good confidence that that's not going to break clusters on upgrade. And so the person driving that feature actually jumped into trying to get the upgrade tests that we have working again, such as they are, while we are waiting for SIG testing to deliver like the one true beautiful upgrade framework. So that got opened today. So that's good to see progress. I'll be glad to have Signal on that and unblock some features like that. Yeah, that's all the updates I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan, for the update and all the work you did to be able to make that good news update. Looks like we have one flaky, very flaky UDE test.
So that is a
Or just
known
broken.
issue. It is a conformance test that was added in 119 that is running in the cluster API provider job, which is running 119 tests against a 118 cluster. So there is an issue tracking that, and it seems to be bouncing back and forth between SIG release and SIG cluster lifecycle as to like how this job needs to be configured. Yeah.
Awesome. Then I'll ignore it.
Yeah, Oliver Mears. Yeah, that won't work.
Yeah.
If it did work, I would be concerned. If the test was passing against a 118 cluster, I would have serious concerns about it.
These two, I don't know.
If we see one flake in a 2-week period, I'm probably not going to open an issue for it. maybe we'll get to the point where that is a standard we can expect, but especially depending on the job. So if we see those in like master blocking jobs, then I would pay attention to them because those are the ones that have like reserved signal or reserved resources and are release blocking. If they are in jobs that we control, then I would pay attention to them. If they are in jobs that aren't release blocking or release informing controlled by other SIGs and there's one flake in 2 weeks, that doesn't seem like something we need to dig into right now.
Awesome. Let's get through these bugs real quick. SIG Auth. I think we need to chase down what the status of is for support issues. We used to redirect to Stack Overflow and have a canned response. But I don't know if that's still the case.
We got in trouble for doing that. Stack Overflow basically started closing issues that got open saying this isn't a support for. Which is fair.
Isn't that what Stack Overflow is, though? What is it if it's not that?
That
Okay.
seems to be pretty clearly a config issue. If you want to tag me, I can make some suggestions and close it out.
All right. Node authorizer fails to authorize requests right after KubeCon server restarts. We added a live readiness block for the informer cache warm up. I feel like this is going to be.
I think the right owners are on there. Scalability team is the one noticing the most because they're starting big clusters and doing stuff to them. I think Wojtek and I can either drive that or rope in the right people.
Okay, how is it showing up on? Okay, it's unprioritized.
That seems maybe long-term, backlog or long-term.
Thought there was a PR out to fix this, maybe, or maybe the PR never went out.
This, I would say, this is important soon. Constructing a client set exercises this like 40 times maybe. And so if you construct a client set inside the controller manager for every controller loop, you've got like 40 times, I don't know, 30, 40, something like that.
I'm going to backlog this. Just the mechanism may change soon.
Documentation for rotating keys, wait 5 years, and then use the new mechanism.
Yeah. Maybe not that soon.
It makes me sad.
Rules review.
Fixed. Oh, maybe it got fixed, but it lacks test coverage. Yeah.
Help wanted already. Do backlog issues have to be assigned? Or is this already assigned? It's already assigned. Add test coverage, subject rules review.
Mo is on it. Did you see it? Okay.
Just needs somebody needs to finish the review on it.
GitHub indexes are slow sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is the GA for this planned? Is that going to happen in 120?
I need to sync up with Mo and see when. Actually, I think I got pinged on a design update for that, so I owe an answer to that. Design freeze for 120 is October 6th, I believe.
Just have to mark it implementable, I think.
There were a couple things that got put into the implementation after the design that we're kind of going back and forth on. So yeah, it's not quite closed.
Again,
I would like to see it in 120. It kind of depends on what happens in the next week or two.
I'll mention this to Andrew.
Yeah, this was the client credential, right? Externalizable client credentials.
Yeah, it's the client Go.
Yeah. Yeah, he had pinged me and I grounded 119 stuff. So I need to circle back to that. So it involves in my court.
Should we document Kubernetes IO PSP annotation?
Yeah, we've got docs for it. It's a thing. We should explain what it means. That's fine.
All right.
The priority and the assignment look correct.
Okay, so it does not appear to be documented in the main docs. Okay, I sent it to him. Suicidedriver needs some way to get service account tokens. This is weird. I think GitHub messed up because I tried to assign Shihong to one issue, and then I tried to assign him to another.
Once they so someone who's not an org member cannot be assigned until they comment on an issue.
Interesting.
It's super squirrely.
That's what it was. I'm going to say this is long-term important, given the value to various subprojects and interest. And the implementation is out for this, and the KEP is merged. Uh-oh. Issue 40,000.
I think this got closed as unactionable and should be a KEP, and then it got reopened, but I don't think it's actionable, and I still think it requires like a concrete design. So I think it should be closed again and say like if there are specific proposals, like those should be opened as proposals, but this is not driving anything. I have a nicer way to say that as a saved response in GitHub. If you would like me to put that in.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe I shouldn't have admitted that, but
I'm
I
gonna
do.
save your saved response. All right, through those. Bugs. There was one other one that is not showing up here. Keylog writer. Somebody wants to write the master secrets for TLS connections to the Kubernetes API server to some file. Mike does. Presumably this is to use Wireshark for debugging API server traffic.
Config options and wiring seem really heavy for this. Maybe that's just me.
The alternative is just build a custom binary, right?
Yeah.
It'd be helpful to know what the intended audience is. If it's someone who is like developing stuff inside the server, then that's probably reasonable and what I would recommend. If it's someone who is running the server and wants to inspect stuff, then I don't like giving levers that I would never actually want to see used in anything I cared about.
Right.
So yeah, asking the audience would probably be good.
What was that?
Just asking who the intended users are. Are they people who could like set this in a build themselves?
Right. User info UID not passed by client go.
So we're missing a field in auth proxy and impersonation headers, which has never come up before because the UID field is underused.
I can take a look.
Yeah.
I'll also add. Node authorizer, scalability thing, output flood. I think we decided that
Marked important string, it would be good to take stale off of that and make sure it has an owner who is driving it.
Yeah. And I think this is just the error message thing. Is this one fixed? Projected service count token has mode of match file hard coded to yeah, I think this is fixed. But the implementation PR is not linked from the cap. I'll close that offline and then trail bit stuff. Yep, rest of them look standard. Awesome. I think that's everything. Does anybody have any closing thoughts? If not,
just a reminder that the enhancements deadline for 120 is October 6th. So that means designs for things that are happening in 120 need to be implementable by then. So if you're responsible for those, drive them. And if people are waiting on you for them, then respond. And I'm talking to myself there.
Yeah, I think selfishly, I'm looking forward for the to the GA of token request and the token volume projection. Is there anything else? We have GA of certificates, API. What you marked that implementable?
The client go exec credential stuff. That was the other thing for 120 that I think is close enough that it could reasonably happen.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. See you all in 2 weeks.